How the Western strategy is disrupting Nigeria's leadership of Africa. Have you ever wondered why, despite its size, population, and financial potential, Nigeria is not taken seriously as a leader in Africa? Nigeria is widely recognized as the most populous country on the continent and, until recently, had the highest GDP in Africa. It is home to some of the most innovative minds, many of whom have contributed significantly in various fields globally. Many expect Nigeria to lead Africa. Prominent figures like Nelson Mandela, Desmond Tutu, and others have consistently stated that the future development and emancipation of Africa depend on Nigeria's progress. And yet, despite these high expectations, Nigeria has repeatedly shown that it struggles to meet the demands of leadership. Once regarded as a force to be reckoned with, especially in the late 20th century, Nigeria has faltered in recent decades, particularly in instances where the continent needed strong leadership. The reasons behind Nigeria's consistent decline in providing effective continental leadership can also be traced to external manipulations that have played a role in steering Nigeria towards ineffective political leadership. Since Nigeria's return to civilian rule in 1999, with former military general Olusegun Obasanjo elected as the first president of the Third Republic, subsequent administrations have often underperformed. From 2014, Nigeria heads towards a low point under the leadership of another former military general, Muhammadu Buhari. The external factors influencing Buhari's rise to power became clearer over time. For years, the West viewed Nigeria as a critical player that could lead Africa out of its challenges. However, they also recognized that a strong, politically stable Nigeria would likely pose a threat to their control over African resources. To prevent this, especially in the context of growing Nigerian political and economic independence, the West, particularly the US and Europe, sought ways to disrupt the country's development. Leading up to the 2014 election, the US played a key role in exacerbating insecurity within Nigeria. The Boko Haram insurgency, among other security issues, was deliberately amplified, and conventional arms support was withdrawn from the government of then-President Goodluck Jonathan. This created the conditions for public discontent, culminating in the abduction of schoolgirls, a moment that provided the catalyst for widespread outrage. During this period, US President Barack Obama made it clear that it was a priority for his administration to prevent Nigeria from achieving political and economic stability. His administration's efforts, including diplomatic outreach to the Sultan of Sokoto, aimed at positioning an inexperienced Muslim leader who would not pose a challenge to Western interests. Ultimately, Buhari was brought into power, a figure visibly weak and lacking leadership capacity, precisely what the West needed to ensure that Nigeria would not become the continental leader it was capable of being. Buhari's 8 years in office were a disaster for Nigeria's image. Institutions weakened, the economy suffered, and insecurity, terrorism, and human rights abuses skyrocketed. All of this contributed to the West's success in keeping Nigeria away from its potential to lead Africa. The international community, including the US, EU, and the UN, largely celebrated Nigeria's failure to reassert itself as a leader on the continent. Then came Bola Tinubu, who assumed the presidency in a controversial election where Western support was more silent but still evident. Tinubu was favored by Western powers due to his numerous skeletons in the closet, which would ensure his compliance and make him more manageable. Tinubu's first task was to forcefully address the attempts by military-led ECOWAS countries to challenge Western exploitation. Unfortunately, circumstances have prevented Tinubu from achieving any notable success in this regard. Since then, Nigeria's influence has dwindled, and it has become largely irrelevant in the discussion of Africa's progress. Today, Nigeria has lost its reputation as a leader, both regionally and continentally, Other African nations have quietly accepted this reality. Even though Nigeria holds the rotating chairmanship of ECOWAS, this position is based more on formality than any real achievement. Other smaller African nations are now seen as more proactive in addressing critical issues concerning the continent. The military-led West African countries have withdrawn from ECOWAS and, in doing so, have garnered significant respect for their strong leadership across the continent. There is little Nigeria can do to alter this reality. The dream of a strong Nigerian leadership that would guide Africa toward unity and emancipation remains unfulfilled. It's important to note that this situation has not happened by chance. From the outset of Nigeria's colonial history, the British exit strategy handed Nigeria's future to the Fulani-Sokoto oligarchy. This has constrained the country from achieving internal peace and political stability, thus hindering its capacity to lead. Nearly 64 years after gaining independence, Nigeria's political landscape is still dominated by the warlike Fulani elite, who, despite their power, lack the necessary knowledge and skills to govern in a modern society. The critical question remains: how can a nation embroiled in such internal political turmoil and dysfunction be expected to lead a continent? The West understands that if Nigeria were to break free from its internal struggles, it could become a beacon of freedom and prosperity for the entire continent. Consequently, they continue to ensure that Nigeria remains in the grip of poor leadership, preventing it from fulfilling its potential. Unfortunately, this situation is unlikely to change, as Nigeria's future is already deeply compromised by these entrenched forces. Diaspoint values your perspective and encourages you to share your thoughts on the topics we present. Feel free to comment and share with your network to spark broader discussions.